Welcome to Leading Entrepreneurs of the World. I'm Jonathan Kitchens, CMO at One Business World. Leading Entrepreneurs of the World features entrepreneurs, founders, business leaders who present on cutting-edge topics in the latest industry developments. Today, we are super excited to welcome entrepreneur and freelance expert, Abby Verma. Abby is a global entrepreneur and started SkillSoniq with a vision to transform the traditional recruiting space. Abby comes with 14 years of experience in entrepreneurship, tech consulting, and investment banking. At SkillSoniq, Abby and his team operate an AI-powered recruiting app that connects companies with skilled local freelancers. Through SkillSoniq, companies hire skilled freelancers within seconds and convert the best ones to their payroll, thereby taking the guesswork out of recruiting and saving 60% or more in hiring costs. SkillSoniq's ultimate vision is to replace time spent on interviews with time spent on trying out a potential employee. They aspire to make hiring as simple as possible, and they launched in New York in 2019. SkillSoniq has a growing customer base and has expanded to 5 major cities across the US and Canada in under 2 years. Abby, we're so very excited to have you here with us today and looking forward to hearing more about the things you're doing at SkillSoniq. And we look to see what's happening as a result of your technological advancements, but also how COVID-19 has impacted your part of the world. Welcome, Abby.
Thanks, Jonathan. And I'm excited to be here with the team and talk more about how the pandemic has revolutionized the way people work, especially in the freelancing space. So I'm just gonna share my screen. I have a few slides. Just give me 1 second. Okay, great. So I think before we kind of think about and see how the pandemic has really caused the freelance revolution, it's important for us to understand who freelancers really are, right? You may have heard this term before the pandemic, on and off. There's different connotations people have of, who freelancers really are. Is it Uber drivers? Is it Lyft drivers? Are freelancers, the mechanics and plumbers who come to our house? Who are these people, right? I mean, we've grown up knowing about employees and, people going to work in the office, working, 9 to 5 shifts. But, in terms of knowing about freelancers, a lot of people are unaware. So the way to think about freelancing and freelancers is really, there's 3 tenets to it. The first is these people are self-employed. So what does that mean? That means they either have their own company and they're providing services to other clients, or they're working as an independent contractor on an individual basis, providing services to a company. So you could think of them as a consultant, you could think of them as an entrepreneur, you could think of them as a business owner who's providing services to other clients. And we're going to get into what sorts of services these freelancers provide in a few minutes. The second way to think about freelancers is that they're flexible. What does that mean? In the traditional world, we've all been used to having people come into the office 9 to 6, taking time off on the weekends, coming back again on Monday, getting the Monday blues. And so, when you think of employees, they follow a certain routine when they're working. Freelancers, on the other hand, are flexible, which means that they do not follow the typical 9 to 6 or 9 to 5 kind of workday schedule. They work when they want. Oftentimes, they prioritize their work outside of their personal life, and they go by deadlines. So if, let's say, they promise a certain deliverable to a client, or if there's certain work to be done by a certain deadline, the freelancers kind of figure out on their own how they would be achieving the deliverable within the stipulated deadlines. So they're not controlled by companies that are hiring them, and they're not supposed to report into work or report into hiring managers and say, hey, good morning, I'm here in the office, and then say goodbye before leaving. The third aspect of freelancers is that they're independent. And so what that means is they're not controlled by, by the companies for which they're working. And specifically, they're not given insurance benefits in most cases. There's no payroll tax that the company pays on their behalf. They don't get any payroll deductions. They're not under W-2 of an employer. In most cases, they're independent contractors. And essentially what that means is they are self-employed, and they provide for their own benefits. They file their own taxes at the end of the year. So they pretty much do everything on their own. So that's kind of the way to think about freelancers in the US and across the world. So this is just kind of like a picture that denotes visually, who a freelancer is versus our traditional mindset of who, an employee is. So you could think of an employee, in the pre-pandemic days, it seems like a long time ago, where people used to come into the office. We used to have WeWorks of the world. A lot of companies used to have cubicles. They used to call people in the office. They used to work in these cubicles, work 9 to 5, and then, after 5, 6, they used to get back home. So if you think of the traditional employee, most of those kinds of people most of the employees kind of adjust their personal life outside of their work life, right? So if you were an employee for a company, and if, let's say, you needed a vacation to go out with your family or friends, you needed to take some time off, you would have to think about, talking to your boss, applying for a paid leave, or even if you're sick, you had to think about applying for a sick leave. So the way to think about employees is these are people who are primarily working in the workspace. And then if they have to take time off, they have to kind of adjust their personal life outside of their work life. Freelancers, on the other hand, are people who kind of adjust their work life outside of their personal life, right? So if you think about freelancing, these are people who are free-spirited, whose priority is work-life balance. They think about, in most cases, their personal life, and then they see, okay, what work do I have to do? What are the deliverables? What's my scope of work for the clients I'm working for? And then accordingly, they kind of adjust to squeeze in some amount of hours to get work done. So if you think about Uber drivers, a lot of them are full-time employees working for a company, but they're hustling on the side to make extra money, right? So these are people who can turn on and off the Uber app whenever they're looking to make extra money. They do their shifts, and then they kind of think about their work in the personal life, and they turn on that Uber app whenever they want, right? So you can think of freelancers in that light. So this is just a cartoon which kind of talks about the difference between employees and freelancers. So to my earlier point that freelancers often adjust their work life around their personal life, right? So we've all been used to getting up Monday morning and looking at that alarm clock, disgusted, saying, oh my God, we have to get to work. We've overslept. And then we kind of like quickly, dress up and get to work. So that's kind of the picture that comes to mind when you think about pre-pandemic days, reporting into work every single day. Freelancers, obviously, on the other hand, are people who kind of, again, adjust their work life outside of their personal life. So they don't really have to worry about reporting into work. They can sleep till 9 a.m. And, when 9 a.m. rolls around, they just brush and switch on the system and get to work. Obviously, with employees, as a lot of you could imagine before the pandemic, a lot of the employees used to, if it was Friday evening or Thursday evening, You would, be suited up in an office, kind of finish up that work, kind of, put in some face time. If your, boss was around, you would be in the workspace, kind of, put in some face time. And, your friends would be calling you. You would have some plans with your family. Your wife would be hounding on the phone. When are you coming back? And you'd just be like, I have work until 6 p.m. We can meet after I finish my work, right? Freelancers, obviously, on the other hand, are more free in terms of timing, because they're thinking constantly about what's my deadline, what's the work to be done, how can I make this more efficient, can I complete the work in 30 minutes? If I'm able to do that, I can basically go out for beer, do whatever I want to after that, right? So it's not like the freelancers are not getting stuff done. They're still getting stuff done, but it's just that they don't follow a certain kind of schedule, like the monotonous kind of 9 to 6 that all of us were used to before the pandemic. But obviously the pandemic has changed a lot of that, which we're going to talk about. So in terms of the types of services and goods provided by freelancers, there's obviously different types, right? So you have people who provide so-called unskilled services or labor. So you can think of this as perhaps Uber drivers, people who come in and do plumbing in your house, people who are mechanics, electricians. You could perhaps think of them or categorize them into unskilled, kind of like blue collar workers. Then obviously you can think of freelancers as people who sell goods and do other activities. These could be, real estate brokers, people who are selling tangible kind of, tangible goods. And then obviously there's the category for providing skilled services. So there have been studies out there commissioned by the Freelancers Union in the US and by Upwork, which is the largest freelance website in the world. And what was found through these studies is that providing services is the most common type of freelance kind of gig that's out there. And even within providing services, providing skilled services is the most popular amongst freelancers, right? And so we're going to dive deep into what that really means, and how that's been impacted with the pandemic, and how companies and freelancers are kind of working together in that category. So just a deep dive into the types of skilled freelancers, right? So you may ask yourself, well, that's great to see that a lot of freelancers are categorized in the skilled services category, but what does that really mean? So contrary to popular beliefs that freelancing, really is unskilled by nature, there are a ton of skilled freelancers in the US. And these are people who provide services that a typical employee would provide in the workplace, right? So the types of skills they provide range from technical skills. Within tech, it could be, people who are doing coding for you, program management, project management, product managers. So you could even have like a Google or a Facebook hiring, freelancers who are providing product management to them, or who are full stack developers or front end or back end developers. So all of those guys could be freelancing. And then outside of tech, you have a bunch of other categories, right? So you have a bunch of professionals who are providing skilled services. So these could be CPAs, CFAs, tax season is coming. So it could be your independent tax accountants, a lot of trainers who provide training to companies or even within schools or colleges. You have a lot of educators who are professionals. All of these people could be freelancing, right? And they're providing skilled services to their clients. Then you have creatives, right? So these are people who provide, logo design, who could do photography, videography. If you're a company, you need to get, a video edited. You're running a campaign, you need to get a campaign video prepared. You could hire a lot of these creative kind of people to do those gigs for you. And these are people, again, who are providing skilled services. Then you have a lot of data geeks, right? So with ML and AI being in the forefront these days, there's a lot of freelancers who are constantly educating themselves on concepts of machine learning, artificial intelligence. So these are people who come in with that knowledge, right? So you don't typically have to train them. They're training themselves, they're educating themselves. They're constantly kind of updating their skill sets. And so these are people who provide, big data services. They could even be consulting companies on how they should be moving, to the digital world, how companies can adopt concepts of AI, et cetera, right? Then you obviously have salespeople, right? So a lot of these salespeople provide skilled freelance services. They could be inside sales reps, outside sales reps. Think about, people who make cold calls, send out cold emails. So a lot of these types of freelancers are extremely popular amongst companies, especially smaller companies who are looking for, for growth of their business. Then freelancing could also be providing admin services, right? So you have a ton of people who provide customer support. You could have exec assistants, admin assistants, data entry, just people who are doing, data entry work. So you can have a lot of these kinds of people providing skill services as well. And then there's obviously marketing, which is extremely popular these days. SEO, SEM marketing, people who provide paid ad services, social media services, people who are doing a lot of content editing. You have a lot of independent copywriters out there. So these are also people who are freelancing and providing skilled services to companies. And then finally, you have, other kinds of freelancers. I just kind of went through a few of the categories, but there's obviously a ton of other types of people like operations assistants, operations specialists, people who work in the back office, etc. Right. So, so given that understanding of freelancing and especially skilled freelancing, how has it been impacted with COVID, right? So the way to think about it is there are studies that showed that last year there's been a 4.4% decline in the global economy, right? I think China was pretty much the only country that had a positive GDP growth. I think every other country out there had a negative GDP growth last year. So obviously, all of us are aware that millions of people were laid off. A lot of them were furloughed. A lot of companies shut down offices. The whole kind of commuting to work routine that all of us were used to just went out of the door. And as a result of that, what happened was we didn't have to report to the office anymore, right? So obviously we were used to kind of in New York, as an example, used to, catching the subway in the morning, grabbing that cup of coffee, getting to work, gossiping with workers, getting some stuff done in front of the computer. So obviously all of that changed with the pandemic. And as a result of that, there are studies that were done by Stanford last year, which showed that nearly 50% of the US workforce worked from home last year, right? So think about that. That's half the workforce, right? That's probably about 150 to 160 million people who work from home. So if you think about it, that was a huge shift with the pandemic. Obviously, Zoom became a household name, whether it was for personal parties or for office work. We all got used to kind of sitting in front of the laptop, logging into meetings, seeing each other, digitally, and all of that, right? Whether it was training your parents on how to use Zoom, or looking at internet connections in the house to make sure you had fast Wi-Fi. So the trend has been that all of us have now kind of been working from home most of the time, and we're all getting used to that concept of of having a work-life balance and really balancing out our personal with our work life. So obviously with COVID, there was a lot of press out there which showed that the pandemic has really boosted the freelance kind of trend, right? It's caused a freelance revolution, and a lot more people are now open to the concept of freelancing. From the company standpoint, a lot of these companies are getting used to hiring freelancers, and we're going to get into why that's the case. But there has been a huge tectonic shift towards freelancing. So the way to think about why the freelance revolution has happened, right, during and after COVID, and it's probably going to stick around for the next decade or so. The way we think of it here at SkillSoniq is there's this concept of a COVID cocktail, right? So when you think of a cocktail, you think of like a mix of factors that are concocted together to make a really good drink, right? So if you think about COVID and the impact it's had, you can think of the impact as a COVID cocktail. So what does that mean? That means obviously, as companies shut down offices, in fact, there are reports that, big companies like Deloitte are now shutting down their offices for good. Tech companies like Google and Facebook have extended their work from home policies. They don't expect people to come into the office at least till the end of the year. So there's obviously been that huge shift in the work from home culture. There are studies that predict that this year, at least 25% of the global workforce is going to be working from home, right? So that's been a huge factor in people just getting used to the concept of freelancing. So if you think about it, there's two types of workers today, right? So people who still have a job and people who do not have a job. So if you think about the people who do not have a job, the best way for them to get back in the job market is through freelancing, right? So if, let's say, think of yourself as, let's say, a financial analyst who was working for an investment bank, and you were laid off during the pandemic, you've just spent the last few years of your life kind of learning about or building an expertise in investment banking. What do you do now, right? There are no jobs out there, so you start freelancing, right? So a lot of those who are unemployed are now using digital platforms to market their services because they have no other option, right? You're sitting at home, your wife and you are quarreling, your kids are running around, you need money, obviously, to sustain your family, and you have all of these skills that you built over the last few years. So the only way for you to kind of make money and get back to what you do best is by freelancing, right? So we're seeing that trend amongst a lot of the unemployed, because for them to find a full-time job, the cycle for that is extremely long, right? So it could take a few months before you're back in the job market, and so you're kind of forced to freelance, right? So that's for the category of people who are unemployed. Then think of the people who are employed, right? So now that you're employed, you're still employed with the company, but you don't have to commute to work every day, right? You're saving a lot of time because you're working out of home. You're becoming more efficient in the workplace, right? So by working from home, you don't have to worry about, going to the cafeteria and grabbing lunch. You don't have to worry about taking smoke breaks. So you're getting more efficient by being at home. And so a lot of people who are still employed are now thinking about, okay, in an 8-hour workday, I'm only working about 4 to 5 hours, right? You're still getting the work done worth an 8-hour workday, but you're spending maybe about 4 to 5 hours getting that work done. So what do you do for the rest of the time, right? So a lot of people who are still employed are thinking about, okay, maybe I should make extra money, maybe I should do kind of side gigs, whether it's providing services in your own field of work. So if, let's say, you were a digital marketer for a company, you have all of these skill sets. Maybe you should start marketing these skills to other clients, right? So these are some of the things that people who are still employed are thinking about, and all of these thoughts are driving them towards freelancing, right? So these are people who probably never freelanced before because they've been so used to working a full-time job last few years, but now they're kind of, thinking about making that extra money, utilizing their workday more efficiently, etc. Right? So all of that is one factor towards the COVID cocktail that we think is causing the freelance revolution. So that's from the supply point of view, right? So that's from a job seeker's point of view. Now think of it from a company standpoint, right? What companies are, and especially the companies we've been speaking to at SkillSoniq, a lot of them are in a cost-cutting mode, right? So they're actually they're forming cost committees to think about how they should be reducing their costs for the next few years. And obviously, having employees is a huge, huge cost base for a lot of these companies. It's fixed cost. They have to pay payroll taxes. They have to pay benefits to these employees. They have to think about infrastructure that they have to provide to these employees, whether it's given laptop machines, whether it's, even given credits in terms of rent credits or commute credits. A lot of companies are now providing benefits like fast Wi-Fi speeds to their employees. So all of this adds up in terms of the cost base. So companies are now thinking about, okay, how do we reduce that cost, right? And for them to move to freelancing is a great way to reduce costs, right? Freelancers do not have to be paid benefits. You do not have to withhold taxes. You do not have to pay payroll taxes. You do not have to think about training these freelancers because they're, constantly educating themselves. You do not have to think about providing, infrastructure to these people. So companies are now realizing that maybe a lot of the people we have on our payroll, maybe we should be having them work for us as a consultant or a freelancer. So a lot of companies, especially smaller companies where every dollar matters, are thinking about moving to their workforce from employees to freelancers. Now, obviously, that has its own benefits in terms of flexibility as well, right? So think about a company that's working on a marketing campaign, right? And if they are looking to hire, let's say, a digital marketer or someone who has experience with paid ads or Google ads, they're probably not going to use the services of this person throughout the year. They're probably going to need their services maybe 6 months in a year, right? The rest of the time, maybe they can keep them on the bench. So using the services of freelancers is providing companies with a lot of flexibility where they're not tied into that employment contract and they don't have to constantly spend on these employees despite the employees not working. And so companies are realizing that very, very quickly. And that's also been a force, huge kind of driving force for companies to now try out these freelancers. So given that kind of context, there's 5 or 6 industries or functions where freelancing is booming right now. So you have, the traditional accountants who provide, bookkeeping services. These are people who are tax experts. So companies are realizing that instead of having an in-house kind of accounting team, why not outsource it to accounting specialists who provide these services to us? So a lot of companies are now kind of hiring a lot of freelancers who come with that accounting experience. Customer service is another area where companies are investing a lot in terms of hiring freelancers. They've realized that, these teams could be easily outsourced. They could be easily kind of trained on the processes that a company follows. Um, so it's really easy for companies to outsource a lot of their customer service functions to freelancers. Digital marketing is another great kind of example of an area where companies are hiring freelancers. They've realized that there's no point in having in-house digital marketers. They don't even need to be in the office, to be honest. Might as well hire people who are working for us on a freelance basis, people who are experts in the field. And keep in mind that if you hire an employee, you have to constantly train that person, right? Whereas a freelancer comes in with that training, they come in with that skill set. That's what they're providing, right? They're ready to go from day one. And so companies are realizing that in digital marketing, where with technologies constantly changing, it's hard for companies to keep up in terms of kind of training their employees on these new aspects of digital marketing. I might as well just outsource it to freelancers who are educating themselves and can take ownership of the work. And then similarly, there's other companies, other industries where freelancing is booming. Real estate is one of them. So one of the things that's happened with the pandemic is, obviously, since a lot of people are predicted to work from home, at least till the end of this year, they're now looking to own places, right? So they're looking to invest in homes where they can work from home. Real estate prices are going down. And so a lot of the real estate brokers are now back in business, right? So they're also providing a lot of freelance services to both the homeowner and people who are looking to sell, right? So if you look at the COVID cocktail, there's obviously job seekers who are being pushed towards freelancing. There's companies who are looking to lower their costs, and hence they're thinking about hiring freelancers. But both of these factors are enhanced further by the demographics of the labor force here in the US and across the world, right? So with millennials and Gen Z being a huge part of the workforce, there are studies commissioned by the Freelancers Union and Upwork that show that millennials and Gen Z are adopting to the freelance model extremely quickly, right? So these are people who are kind of driving that shift towards freelancing. These people are generally more in touch with technology. They're more free-spirited. They're more open to adopting new models. They're more independent. All of the stuff that really makes up a freelancer is found within these two kind of age groups. And so we're finding that a lot of, these millennials and Gen Z folks who are joining the labor force are driving that tectonic shift towards freelancing. So as a result of all of this, there's actually 65 million people last year who freelanced, right? So think about that number. That's more than a third of the US workforce, right? So this is 65 million just in the US, right? And this constituted people who were working full-time jobs, but would side hustle and do freelance gigs on the side. These also constituted people who were doing, full-time freelancing. That's 65 million is the largest number of people in the labor force till date who've ever freelanced, right? And we experienced this in 2020, which obviously goes to show that from the supply side, a lot of people are now getting comfortable with the concept of freelancing. And so if you think about that 65 million, last year, the freelancers contributed $1.2 trillion to the US economy, right? So that's almost 4 to 5% of the US GDP, right? That's huge. That means a lot of them provided freelance services to companies. Companies actually paid that much to freelance, those 65 million freelancers in the US, which goes to show that the workforce is really moving towards freelancing, and companies are getting more used to the concept of hiring freelancers. In fact, there are studies that show that the number of freelancers for the next 5 to 6 years is going to grow rapidly. So you see the blue line, which represents the number of freelancers in the US, and the orange line represents the number of traditional workers or so-called employees. So there are studies and projections that show that by 2027, the number of freelancers in the US is going to exceed the number of employees or traditional workers. That's great, right? So what does that tell you? That tells you freelance is the future, right? Whether we like it or not, the workforce is heading towards freelancing. In fact, this trend has been seen by countries across the world, whether it's countries in South America, Brazil, Argentina, countries in Europe, UK, a lot of the other European countries in France, Germany. You're finding freelancers growing at a rapid pace in Asia, whether it's India, Pakistan, China, Bangladesh. So this has been a global trend. And believe it or not, we're all moving towards freelancing. So in terms of the types of skilled freelancers, what we've seen over the last year or so is there are three categories of freelancers, right? So we call them dedicated freelancers, who are people who were out of a job, they were laid off, but they wanted to get back in the job market. They had a lot of skills to offer. And so they picked up on different freelance gigs, whether with one company or multiple companies. But these are people who pretty much freelance full-time last year. Then there were people who we call diversified freelancers, right? So these were people who freelance part-time, right? They freelance with different companies. They could be working, 2 days a week with one company, 3 days a week with another company. But these are people who are working part-time with companies and with a diversified set of clients. And then obviously you had people who, had a job, but they were more efficient in the workplace. These were the kinds of people who were thinking, okay, like I'm able to do 8 hours of work in 5 hours. How else can I utilize my workday? And so they found side gigs, and they found a way to kind of make extra money by freelancing on the side, right? So given that context, and given all of the shift that's happening towards freelancing, what SkillSoniq is recommending to companies, especially smaller companies, the way they should be thinking about their hiring strategy is first, they should take a step back and kind of look at all of the functions within the company and see where the gaps are, right? So they should be able to identify hiring needs in different functions, which is normal, which a lot of companies do. But they should be doing it even more so right now to see, even if there's no hiring need in one function, is there a way we can kind of probably replace the employees we have in that function with freelancers? Then once they identify those hiring needs, they should look at freelance platforms or other means to hire local freelancers, right? So by local, we mean at least hire people in the same city or the same country, so that you're in the same time zone. And there's other benefits to hiring local freelancers. So they should look at hiring local freelancers across those functions. Then they should identify the scope of work, right? So they should say, all right, once we've hired these freelancers, how can we utilize their time in the most efficient manner, right? So they should look at having these people work anywhere from 10 hours to 50, 60 hours a week. And not only pay for the time that the freelancers are working for them. That's one of the benefits, obviously, of hiring freelancers is you pay for the work that they do. And then once you start hiring these freelancers, once you get comfortable with them, once they start performing for you, you obviously start identifying which of those freelancers are worth a buyout. And in the SkillSoniq world, a buyout means someone you could perhaps look at moving to the payroll and giving benefits and all of that stuff. Because keep in mind that if you keep working with freelancers, there is a flight risk that these people come with, right? So if I'm a freelancer working for your company, I could leave any day, right? I mean, there could be a termination period of maybe 5 days, 10 days, but that's it. Like I could just say, hey, you know what? Like, I don't want to work on this contract anymore, right? So there's a concept of flight risk. So companies have to keep that in mind so that if they really like someone or they want to work with them permanent or on a longer term basis, but they want to provide them benefits, they want to keep them motivated to work with them, they should think about then buying out those people or moving them to the payroll and then investing in, benefits or payroll tax and all other kind of the fringe benefits that come with having someone on the payroll. So in order to kind of execute this strategy, SkillSoniq is actually, it helps companies in doing that, right? So we are the world's first AI-powered recruiting app that connects companies with skilled contract to hire freelancers, right? So what does that mean? That means companies are able to come in, post jobs once they've identified hiring needs, obviously. And then once they post these jobs, they're able to kind of hire these freelancers within seconds across all kinds of skill sets, whether it's tech or non-tech, whether you want to hire sales, marketing, accounting, finance, any of these people. And then, companies are able to try out these people on a freelance basis. They're able to see if this person fits into their culture, if they have the required skill sets for the job. And then once they're comfortable with that person, they're able to move them to the payroll, right? So we're giving companies the option to try people on a freelance basis before they decide to hire them on the payroll. And as a result of that, companies are able to save a lot of cost in hiring, training, and onboarding someone on the payroll. What we've realized is no matter how much you interview someone, you don't really know how good that person is until they start working with you, right? And companies have this mindset that if I'm paying 200K or 150K for a job, I might as well spend 50, 60 days trying to hire someone because they have this cold feet, right? Because they're paying so much, they want to make sure they're hiring the right person. But in their head, they think they're, if they spend 50 days interviewing someone, that they would have found the right person. But that's not the case. There are studies that show that even after you hire someone on the payroll, 60 to 70% of those people are misfits for your company. And so now you've spent 50 days, 60 days, and about $7,000 to $8,000 trying to hire someone, only to find out they're the wrong fit for you. And so what SkillSoniq is doing for companies is allowing them to cut down that time to hire, to simply just try out people on a freelance basis. And if they think the fit is right, to be able to move them to their payroll. If they think it's not the right person or they want to try them out further, they can easily extend the contract and continue to work with them on a trial basis. So through that model, SkillSoniq has been able to save companies 60% in cost. In terms of our pricing, during the trial, we're free for companies, so they can come in, they can post unlimited jobs, they can hire unlimited people on a trial basis. We do keep a cut from the freelancers, right? So this is typical of a freelance marketplace. Think of Uber keeping a 20% cut from the drivers. Similar to that, during the trial, SkillSoniq keeps a 10% cut from the job seeker who's been put on a trial. And then obviously once the company moves the freelancer to their payroll, they pay us a $99 fee, which is a one-time nominal fee for moving them to the payroll. So we're extremely affordable, and we're working with a ton of small companies who are saving a lot of costs through us. We in fact just launched a second round of funding to further expand our marketplace in North America. And we're right now inviting retail investors to invest a minimum of $150 in SkillSoniq. We've launched a campaign on Start Engine. So you can go to startengine.com/SkillSoniq. You see the URL there at the bottom. So if you believe in the freelance revolution, if you want to participate in it, even without being a freelancer, you're able to invest, as low as $150 in SkillSoniq and get a piece of the action through shares in our company, right? So that's it from my side, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about, what's happening in the freelance space, and I'm excited. I hope you guys are as excited as I am in experiencing the freelance revolution for the next decade or so. Thank you.
Awesome. Abby, thanks so much. Very exciting things you're doing there at SkillSoniq, and something that as a former freelancer is near and dear to my heart as well. One question that we wanted to ask was, how do you see kind of the pandemic, and you touched briefly on it, but how is that really catapulting this kind of marriage between company and freelance, and how do you anticipate that is going to change really permanently the way we're doing business here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the trends that we're seeing from the companies is a lot of them, if you go back to the cost cutting initiatives that companies that I spoke about earlier, a lot of the companies are now thinking about their cost structures and how they should be more nimble in their respective industries, right? And one of the ways in which they can be more agile or nimble is to be able to have a flexible workforce. And so a lot of these companies are now getting used to the fact that a lot of the job seekers are working from home. A lot of them want to work from home. The job seekers are getting really used to the concept of working from home. And so the way we see it is companies may not have any other option but to hire these people on a freelance basis, right? So if you think about kind of the economics of it, 65 million people freelance last year. It's going to be getting up to 100 million in the next few years. And so a lot more job seekers are going to demand working on a freelance basis for these companies. And so the way we see it is either the companies resist the future, or they're on board with the future, right? So if they're on board with the future, the way they should be thinking about it is how do we kind of, from an infrastructure standpoint, from a work-life balance standpoint, even rejigging, the entire employee benefits program, how do we now think about giving benefits to, let's say, freelancers, still keeping them motivated to be able to work with our company long term, right? So one of the models that I spoke about earlier, which we're seeing and which we think is a future, is where companies would be able to hire these people on a freelance basis, try them out, and then move them to the payroll, right? So that's going to be a great way for companies to reduce their cost. They still have the flexibility of ending contracts if they don't find someone who is the right fit for their culture. And at the same time, they have the option to move them to the payroll and give them benefits. So we're seeing an interesting kind of marriage between companies and job seekers happening right now, and it's exciting. We get, right now we have about 15,000 freelancers onboarded on SkillSoniq. We're in 5 cities across the US and Canada. And so a lot of these people that have signed up with us are now demanding that trial period, right? Even they want to test out a company, right? Because they have that liberty to do that, right? So they're like, and these could be people who have a full-time job but are looking for side gigs, people who've been out of a job, but they want to be very, very selective about working with companies, because they've also realized that, once they're working full-time with a company, and if they get laid off in the future, it's they go through a terrible time. So they don't want to see that again. So even from a job seeker standpoint, we're seeing that trend where they're dictating terms with companies, and companies have to kind of adjust their business model to that. So just real quick, one of the product visions we have at SkillSoniq, I had this slide up earlier. Can you see my screen, by the way?
Not currently.
Okay.
There we go.
Yep. So the vision that we have for our product, and this is where we think a lot of freelance marketplaces are going, is in the next few years, with voice-enabled devices becoming more mainstream, hiring managers would be able to hire freelancers very easily, right? So it's going to be as easy as speaking into Amazon Echo, saying, hey, Alexa, get me this person, or hey, Siri, get me a digital marketer. They would be able to, work with these freelancers within seconds. Obviously, since the freelancers would be working from home, it's going to be really easy for them to get started with a company. There's going to be no requirement for training them, onboarding them, putting them on the payroll, doing all the paperwork, all of that stuff, right? So they'd be able to start with these companies within seconds. And then obviously companies would have the option to buy out people who they think are the best fit for their company simply by speaking into these voice-enabled devices. And then as that pattern of hiring happens, these platforms are going to get more intelligent in terms of, what types of talent or what types of skills these companies need. And so they would be able to predict who the next hire should be, et cetera. So that's kind of where we see this going. But it's, it's exciting to see the interaction between these companies and job seekers.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think with the connected world that we're living in now, we're really going to see these types of things, I feel like, and obviously you do as well, really develop into a powerhouse. And it's exciting to see where you guys are going and what your vision is for that as well. One last thing to ask, maybe for the other entrepreneurs who are either somewhere in their journey of creating their business or launching it, or maybe they're just getting started, or maybe they just got an idea. You've been building something amazing through the last few years, since 2019, and even before with some of your other efforts. What advice would you give to them in getting started in a post-COVID world of business and being successful?
Yeah. That's a good question. I'm always asked that, in terms of what advice I have for these entrepreneurs. So there's a few things I've learned, right? I've been a 3 times entrepreneur now. I started my first business at the age of 19, selling, paint jobs in the streets of Detroit in Michigan, while doing a full-time program in Michigan. So, ton of experience in entrepreneurship. There's a couple of things that I would advise, people who are looking to get started or looking to expand their businesses in a post-COVID world. The first thing is, don't get into something that you think is cool to do or just to make money, right? That's my number one advice right now. I know a lot of people are getting into, things that could be a fad, whether it's, maybe perhaps, who knows, cryptocurrencies or even real estate or, anything else that may last short term. And so the first advice I would have is think through what you're getting into. It should be a long-term play, right? You should never get into it because everyone else is getting into it, or that you want to make money. My number one advice, although it's cliched, is to find what you truly like and to get into it for that reason. Because odds are that you're going to fail, right? I mean, as an entrepreneur, we've all seen it. There's, it's almost impossible to succeed as an entrepreneur. So all the odds are stacked up against you. And the only way to survive is to be able to do what you truly like doing, right? So that's number one. Number two is obviously stay close to family and friends. There's never been a better time to stay close to folks that you love. Obviously with the whole concept of work from home, now is a great time to, catch up on those old friends that you're busy, in another city, you couldn't catch up with them, or, to catch up with your kids, with parents who perhaps you live with, but you never had a chance to kind of sit down and spend quality time with them. It also helps in the entrepreneurial journey to stay close with people who love you, because it can get lonely as an entrepreneur. The third piece of advice would be to keep your sense of humor, right? Do not lose that. I've seen a lot of people go crazy doing their business. It impacts their personal life, perhaps impacts their level of confidence. It's a rough journey, and so keeping your sense of humor, I think, keeps things light. You got to be self-deprecating in some ways, and meet with people who make you laugh. I think throughout the journey that really helps. And then the last piece of advice is keep at it, right? Brian Chesky, who is the founder of Airbnb, once said in an interview that 99% of entrepreneurs fail because life happens to them, right? And they just leave what they're doing, right? So it could be an entrepreneur who is in their mid-20s, they worked on something a couple of years, they didn't get funded, or, they're not seeing traction in terms of sales. And in the meantime, guess what happens? They find a job, right, that pays them well. Life happens, or they get married, their responsibilities increase, and so they quit what they're doing, right? So my advice would be, if you're truly getting into something you like, make it a life decision, keep at it. Hopefully you'll see some success at some point, but do not give up. That's not why you should get into it in the first place. You should be at it for at least a few years. And just keep at it.
Awesome. All great advice points. Abby, thank you so much for being a part of Leading Entrepreneurs of the World series. Thanks for your presentation and your time today. Really enlightening, very exciting to look at what you're doing and your insights into the freelance world. You and your team are developing something. I can't wait to be able to go to my Amazon Echo and ask for a new developer as needed as we continue to grow here at One Business World. So we're really excited about what you're doing, and thanks so much again for coming on and talking with us today, and hope to speak to you again soon.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for the opportunity, guys, and it was a pleasure. Happy to help at some point in the future, and good luck.
Awesome. Thanks, Abby.